Hello and welcome to Authors Die Twice, a podcast on video games and aesthetic theory hosted by two living failures. I'm Nathan Weinstein, and joining me for a very special Christmas chat, as always, is Brian Counter. Merry Christmas, Brian.
Hey, Merry Christmas. How's it going?
Pretty good. My dog just chose the exact right moment to do a big ringling shake. Um, you mentioned coming on and maybe just chatting a bit about Christmas games, Christmas memories. We're feeling sentimental today for the holidays. Looking back on, um, I suppose, particular, experiences, vivid experiences we had or have playing games around this time. Do you want to say more about what you had in mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, there are a few levels or a few things going on. I mean, of course, looking back on playing games, I'm sure anyone who plays games, just like anyone who listens to music or reads books or watches movies, has particular memories attached to certain times engaging with those forms, right? But I think especially, that gets ratcheted up a little bit when we're talking about like holiday. Doesn't necessarily have to be Christmas, of course. It can be, you're on break from school or something like that, or you go home for break and have brought home a new semester of experience plus, maybe a new game or something like that, right? So, um, I'll also say I'll just mention too, I'll shout out that I recently reread Game Life by Michael Clune. This won't be an episode about Game Life. I think maybe we'll do that eventually, but in terms of a memoir that's kind of organized around experiences playing games, that was also kind of making me think about this idea as well, right? So I think I might refer a little bit to that book or a few moments that kind of accord with what I'll mention here, I guess. But yeah, I'm kind of trying to really look back and kind of inhabit some of those moments that I had playing certain games that, of course, I've played since, but the times I've played more recently don't necessarily hold a candle to some of the older memories I have playing them.
You did share a memory. Actually, this wasn't on this podcast. It was on a different podcast that we did together, but a
Mhm.
podcast about your book, Four Moments of Aesthetic Experience. I think you talked about being in college and reading Kant's Third Critique while it was snowing outside. And when you mentioned like coming home with a bunch of new experiences, I do imagine you now like having that sublime experience of reading philosophy for the first time and then going home and just like pounding a bunch of Fallout or something.
Yeah, so I think that's partly what my idea is here is that, I mean, and this is again, this is something that Michael Clune evokes really well, not only in game life, but also in, just across his writing, is how any medium, we can just keep it to games to keep it simple here. Any medium will kind of infect not only other mediums for you, like in terms of your experience, there'll be these kind of cross-pollination, but also just your memories, right? It becomes a presence in your life, right? In a way that I think is different from, I mean, we could easily go on about being fans or, thinking about fandom or thinking about lore of a game, a band, a movie, whatever it is. If you go online, you'll see plenty of stuff like that. We could imagine a forum called The Games We Grew Up With, and it's just a bunch of people talking about nostalgia for playing certain games or whatever. And I think that's maybe part of it, but I also think that games do alter the way that we experience the world, that we contextualize things, that we think about um, events in our lives, but also just other things that we're encountering at the time, right? So yeah, certainly I would be reading philosophy and playing Dark Souls, for example, right? Or I mean, this might actually be a good opportunity for me to mention one of my examples here, which is Dark Souls. I remember specifically, I think it might have been the winter break during my first year of college. I came home for the break and I had at the time I had this really tiny, horrible television in my bedroom. And I had taken my Xbox 360, I think or I don't even know. Yeah, I guess it must have been Xbox 360 at the time, to college with me. Brought it home, hooked it up to this like tiny little TV, and I have these really specific memories of just exactly that kind of cross-medium thing that would happen, which is I was playing Dark Souls, but also listening to a few really specific records while I was playing through the game, and I would just kind of do this on repeat. So one of those records was Laughing Stock by the band Talk Talk. So for listeners who maybe don't know them, Talk Talk were mostly known as, or initially known as, like a sort of synth pop band in the 80s. Probably most people would know them from that song "It's My Life" that No Doubt covered. So they were the original band that did that song. But each album they had was a little weirder and more experimental until their final album, Laughing Stock, which is you could call one of the first sort of post-rock albums in terms of using weird instrumentation, having um, a very different, maybe more jazz influenced and classical and other, genres of music influence on it in terms of the instrumentation, the song structure. There were these long drawn out songs and very different from their earlier synth pop stuff. So it's a very spacious, very at times quiet, at times very loud, like very dynamic album. And I really specifically remember playing through the Sen's Fortress part of Dark Souls while listening to that album. And those big, odd, kind of faceless thunder guys who are down at the bottom there who kind of hit you with the lightning rod sort of thing, killing me a bunch of times while listening to this record in my bedroom. There were other albums as well, but I think that's the one that really sticks out. And that kind of synergy of, two things that totally don't belong together, right? Like, but putting them side by side created, I think, a pretty, yeah, pretty interesting moment. I think this is something we haven't talked about too much, but I mean, we've talked about cozy games, we've talked about games that you'll kind of throw on a podcast or whatever while you're playing, but um, I definitely think that like certain games putting on music that maybe doesn't necessarily seem suited to it, right? I mean, you think Dark Souls, you might think, I don't know what kind of music you would put on, right? Some kind of synthesizer music or something like that. But putting on different things, putting on metal, certain metal bands, for example, something else I definitely did. So that sticks out to me as like a, wintertime, late at night sort of experience that really sticks with me. And of course, that's a game I still like, replay, pretty frequently to this day.
It's really funny you bring that up because it's triggering a memory for me that I also have with listening. I think, maybe the only memory I can think of specifically listening to music and playing a game, and it's also Dark Souls, but it's much later. This was maybe 5 years ago. And so I think I've said on this podcast, maybe in our introduction episode, that I stopped playing games for a really long time. I was playing them off and on. I would come home. I was in graduate school. I would come home for the summer and maybe play a game, or I would play a game during the holidays. So that's actually sort of I'm going non-linearly here, but I did the few games that I played for the 6 years I was in grad school and living on the West Coast were uh, almost exclusively were actually exclusively during the summer and during Christmas. Um, but this is actually a memory from I want to say it's 20 it must be 2019, which is the winter of 2019 is not to get too granular here, but I started playing a game. I started playing games again in fall of 2018, like November 2018. After a long gap, I finally got a console again. Um, and the two games I played were God of War, the reboot of the franchise, and then I played the Dark Souls remastered PS4 version. So that was like how I got back into games. This is all ground we've covered. What I haven't talked about is that I then immediately, upon like falling back in love with games, had to go back to I go back to the West Coast. I was on the East Coast at the time, living with my now wife. I had to fly back to the West Coast and teach for a semester at my university. So I didn't have any console, and I was like, man, I just learned how to play these games again. I'm super into Dark Souls. I want to play the rest of them, but I can't play anything for like 4 months. Um, so when I got back, I immediately got right back into it, and I played in very quick succession. I finished Dark Souls 3, I played Bloodborne, and then I went back and replayed Dark Souls. And it was replaying Dark Souls, I it that replay project started at the same time. The band The National,
Hmm.
their album, I think It was like their last, I forgot the album. I think it's maybe I Am Easy to Find.
Hmm.
It's the one that has all these like female vocalists. Like they kind of like broaden out their sort of like musical palette and have a bunch of like more, just departure sort of sonic departures for them. Um, and it was like the lead single from that album was is I just so vividly associate listening to that album like on my computer or something, and playing through Blighttown actually.
Oh wow.
And the song, it's like I think it's called "You Had Your Soul with You" or something, which I guess is appropriate.
Hmm.
But it is a very sort of like again like tonally incongruous song, in that it's uh, yeah, it's like a feel good kind of, it's a bit of like a very traditional sort of like verse chorus, like major key
Yeah.
pop song in its way. But it's like while I was traversing the shittiest part of Dark Souls' world, but actually effectively it matched because I was like having this experience of, oh my God, this game is so easy when you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And the contrast with my first like bumbling experience, and terrified experience in that area could not have been sharper. So I actually was feeling like kind of like blithe, like just a sense of like well-being and relaxation and fun, as I listened to this album, that yeah, it just totally matched the vibe, I guess.
Blithetown. Yeah.
Blithetown, exactly.
I mean that, this is maybe something to file away for later, but I think it would be interesting to do a kind of some kind of playthrough album swap of games. I mean I have like plenty of memories listening to different albums and playing certain games. But yeah, that would be interesting to do that with Dark Souls with the two albums we just mentioned, because I mean it also bears on a pretty good point, which is that, as we've noted, most specifically, I think in our discussions of Bloodborne, uh, the what's happening in the game and our kind of affect at the time totally does not have to match up, right? I mean, I think sometimes it can, but in a really weird, nuanced way, and I think that's what music can sometimes bring out, right? Like maybe this music actually unlocked the experience of like knowing your way around the game and turning Blighttown into Blithetown a little
Yeah.
bit.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing I would say just to your prompt is that there's a striking way in which games lodge in the memory, and
Mhm.
all art lodges in the memory. And you write about this really beautifully, like the way in which, when we remember or think about the experience, the aesthetic experience of a book, like it also includes the room and the light and the
Mhm.
atmosphere and the sound, the sound of traffic, outside that's very
Yeah.
faint, or music from somebody else's apartment, right? As like the lights going down at 4:30 p.m. in November, and you're reading Cormac McCarthy. I don't know, but games have that too, of course. Like you can conjure up the scene of playing the game and the kind of physical state you're in and the atmosphere. But they're unlike other art forms in that you can also just remember being in a space. So, like, because
Mhm.
our memories are often so linked to space, or at least my memory is so linked to space, like I can just conjure rooms, that I inhabited in my, earlier parts of my life or places that I visited. Um, you can sort of remember being in a certain physical space, but also being in a certain game space,
Mhm. Yeah.
And I do feel like that's maybe experientially somewhat different from remembering reading about a space or remembering watching a film that features a space, like it's like specifically that act of like traversing and inhabiting a virtual space that feels so distinct. I had that replaying the Tomb Raider games recently. It was like the Venice sections just were almost too intense. Like I like had to stop playing at times because this is a series that was incredibly important to me that I just stopped playing when I was like 12. I just hadn't touched them since.
Mhm.
Um, and I just remembered every detail of these spaces in a really uncanny way, you know. And that's the thing about the uncanny, it's just in the classical Freudian sense is that it has this powerful sense of like this deep sense of familiarity baked in, And so I actually mean it in the strict sense that like it was a totally distant experience of like otherness and sort of feeling like it didn't feel like had sort of jumped back in time, but I felt the distance between now and then. But it was also like that's kind of the deep sort of yeah, that just deep recognition of these places I felt I'd forgotten. And so I do wonder, this is a question for Sam Tett, who writes about nostalgia in her scholarship,
Mm.
and other forms of memory and memory disruptions that like she would know better than I, like how to theorize this or describe this, um, but I do like I want to insist or at least hypothesize that like we remember game spaces in a certain way. And maybe you and I, or I guess I mean I'm a little bit older than you, but are some of the first generations because we grew up on 3D spaces. I do think it's different
Mm.
for 2D spaces. Like
Yeah, yeah.
3D, I'm the first generation that grew up with 3D space, like grew up on 3D spaces, and that like I was 9 years old when I first played Tomb Raider 1, you
Mm.
know. And I spoke on another podcast that will go up soon about being 11, I think, and playing Metal Gear Solid 1 for the first time. So, um, I do wonder if this is something that will be theorized or like studied, or talked about as our generation gets older, like the fact that we remember these particular virtual spaces so powerfully. The castle in Mario 64 is another one.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should certainly keep thinking about it because now, now to jump back onto something that you said a moment ago, about, remembering memories of games being different from memories of reading, it is an odd thing because, we're seeing obviously the game space and in a way where uh, even if we, pretend we don't identify with our character, we are still kind of inhabiting it in a way, right? With our perspective, or at least with the perspective that we're seeing on the screen. But then we're also obviously always in our real space, and we, like you said, and I really like how you kind of highlighted or the examples you used of music coming from a neighbor's house, right? Or like traffic sounds. It doesn't have to be something that's quote unquote aesthetic, right? It's whatever it is retroactively becomes the part of the aesthetic experience, right? This, I think, is what the role of chance kind of can be in these kind of experiences. And also how they become sort of solidified, through memory, right? I mean, this is what's so important in Proust, as well, right? The involuntary memory, what it is that causes the memory is in a way kind of arbitrary, right? But it becomes the essential thing over time because it happens to be the thing that triggers the memory. Um,
Yeah.
but it's kind of making me think because I have a question, I guess, but I'll kind of maybe answer it first, then ask it to you, which is games. I have a couple similar memories, of holiday time, game playing, of games that I never beat originally, but then kind of eventually came back and was able to complete like years later. And this to me is a weird phenomenon that I don't often, of course you hear people talking about, oh, that game was so hard I couldn't beat it as a kid, right? But I think something interesting happens when you play a game, you hit a wall, when you're younger, you put it down and then you eventually come back to it later on. It feels like it's uncanny in the sense that it feels very familiar, but it also feels maybe like a different game. So
Mhm.
this happened to me with a number of games. Final Fantasy X was one of them, which I played. I mean, it's the Final Fantasy game I've played the most, so I've beat it at least 3 times, I want to say, but I played it a lot as a kid, and that was one of those games that really had, I think, a big effect. I may have alluded to this before, actually, but I think it had a big effect on the way I like organized my time and thought about things, even though none of that was, specific to the world of the game, obviously, or the mechanics of the game. Like I wasn't running around trying to find whatever orbs or spheres or anything.
Here. Yeah.
Yeah, but I do think in an abstract, weird way, it totally, and this is still something I'm not sure on. I'm a little bit fuzzy on what exactly the effect is, but that's one of those games where I never beat it when I was younger. I think I can't remember the part where I dropped off, but then I think when I was in grad school, I got a copy of it and I played it, and I have this really specific memory of playing it in my apartment, and I had a candle, like a just a I bought some candle that I like have never been able to find again. And I have a few things like this in life. There's like a specific bottle of wine that I've asked like wine people about, and I've never been able to find it. I have this candle that I've never been able to find again. So in a way, it's like the swan, Swan's first encounter with the sonata or whatever. But this really specific candle that I think it was like a some kind of sea scent. Like it was supposed to be ocean or sea or something, but it has this particular scent, which I've smelled since, but it's never been exactly the same. It's not been the same candle. But I remember smelling that and playing through, Final Fantasy X. And then, more recently, I think probably 4 years ago, I played through it again. Um, but one that I really think about often that was actually during high school, and I'm pretty sure it was. I have a memory of actually playing it on New Year's Eve, because I can remember that we got Chinese food, which is something we would do on New Year's Eve. And I can also remember, like little high school like memories of my life in high school, right? Like, things I was thinking about, people I was talking to, whatever. But this game was Castlevania Symphony of the Night. So I really specifically remember playing that game. I had some collection for Xbox that had like that, maybe one of the Contra games, and then Frogger. So it was like one of those three game collections. But I just loved that game. I think my first Castlevania game was one that actually came out for the Xbox, so it was a more recent one. But then I found Symphony of the Night and just totally fell in love with it. But again, like, you know, I was in high school. I mean, I was good at games at that time already. I'd played a bunch of games, but I just couldn't figure out the game. I wasn't looking stuff up, so I like kind of let it go on by the wayside. And then eventually I picked up a copy again and was able to complete it. But I guess my question is, I think of course I replay games, a game like Bloodborne or Dark Souls that I've replayed many times. But some games, I think some of those games, if you play them young enough, it's almost, I wonder, it feels like it would have been better to not ever complete the game, or like, maybe to only play little bits of it here and there, because it maybe doesn't change my memory of the game, but it changes what the game is. So when I came back and I played Castlevania again, it felt like a totally different game. Like it felt familiar, but it also felt, I don't know, like I was cheating at the game somehow or something like that, because I already knew about it, right? I didn't just discover it randomly through buying this collection. I didn't have the same sense of awe at what the game revealed itself to be as I was playing it. So I don't know, I wonder if you have, and also I don't mean to derail us because this is a bigger question too, but I wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna sound like a bit of a broken record because I think my only experience of that is the original Tomb Raider games on the PlayStation
Hmm.
1 console. And I mentioned a few times in this, today, but also on this podcast that I recently replayed Tomb Raider 2, which is a kind of year, it was a year-long endeavor. I like parceled it out. I was kind of proceeding very slowly, doing a level every few weeks. And
Hmm.
then I really accelerated around when we started recording in last, February or January,
I
and
remember,
beat
yeah.
it pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But that was a game where I was surprised by how much I recognized. Even I never beat it. I could never beat it without cheat codes. So I would always in Tomb Raider you do these things where like the cheat codes are entered by doing particular actions on screen. So they're kind of like up, down, left, right, whatever cheat codes, but it's like walk up, step, walk backwards,
Yeah.
turn left, turn right. You know. Um, so it's just striking me now as like this sort of interesting kind of literalization. It's both an instantiation of the game convention, and that if you looked at somebody's fingers, they're doing the same thing that they would be doing for, a pure direction system button, a button-based systemic cheat code. But you're also manipulating the avatar and actually making her do certain things on the screen, so she's like actually doing them. So it's interestingly doubled. I only just thought of that, but uh, I would cheat with all those games, and I just thought that was a totally valid way to play the games. They're very difficult and they're extremely confusing, and I think I would buy the strategy guides because there was literally no other way to figure out how to proceed in those games. They're so uncompromising in telling you nothing. Like they actually tell you less than Dark Souls, which is insane.
Yeah.
There's less tutorialization and guidance. Um, But this is all a long way of saying, I must have cheated really well because I remembered basically every level of Tomb Raider 2. So I think I may have actually traversed. What I would do typically is I would get all the guns, I would blow people up with infinite grenades or whatever, and then I would eventually hit a point where like a jump was too hard or a puzzle was too hard, and I would skip to the next level. So I wanted to see every level, but I wasn't at all obsessive about completing them, which is
Right.
strange because that's how I play games now. Um, but in any case, I was surprised that I remembered so much of the later levels, you know. But I jumped to Tomb Raider 3, which is the one that actually sort of looms more vividly in my mind. And I was sort of shocked because I remembered almost none of it. Like there were a few areas I remember the starts of certain levels really well. But
Hmm.
I think like I must have not actually played that game that much, and I must not have gotten very far. I certainly skipped through the whole game and played a little bit of every level, but I think there were several levels where I just would go skip. I'm not doing this. Like they start with a puzzle, there's no action at first, there's no dinosaur or whatever. And
Yeah.
that's what I was really, I was young. That's what I was like really interested in. I wasn't interested in like moving blocks around to try to figure out like the exact way to get to the next room. Um, so I actually fell off that replay. I mean, it's a great game. There are amazing moments. I'm really glad I went back to it, and I may still finish. But uh, I was like, I just don't remember enough of this. Actually, I remember I played the levels I remembered, which amounted to about 20% of the game,
Hmm.
and it sort of felt pointless to continue. Um, so I guess that's my one example of a game that uh, that I didn't finish and came back to, and it was a disorienting experience for like opposite reasons from my experience of playing Tomb Raider 2.
Right.
I'll say quickly, just what in this Tomb Raider lineage, the Uncharted games. This is just a kind of aside, but the Uncharted games, particularly Uncharted 2 and Uncharted 4, will always be my number one Christmas games with a bullet.
Hmm.
Um, spe Particularly or especially Uncharted 4. That's the one that I replayed while in grad school when I hadn't played games in a while. I'd never played a PlayStation 4 game, and I've never felt, not since the days of like first seeing Mario 64, had I ever felt the same kind of sort of technological awe at the graphics and the vistas of a game. Um, and Uncharted 4 also has this very cozy section, or it's not even cozy, but you go to Scotland, and when you arrive there, it looks amazing. It's like you're in this like cemetery on the bluffs over the ocean, and the snow is really deep. And I'd like never experienced snow like that in the game before. Like the snow looked really good. Um, so I think I'll probably, even though that's more recent, again, I think I played that in 2018, or maybe it was 20, it must have been 2017. Um, that will always be my number one as far as games that are linked to Christmas, both circumstantially, because I played them at Christmas, but also like it has this snowy environment that felt very festive.
Sure. Yeah. That makes sense. I've never played those, so I'll have to try one of those at some point.
Four is really good. It gets a lot of flack for having bad combat, which is completely wrong. So there's this conventional wisdom that like Uncharted games and similar to The Last of Us are games that have like they have good stories and bad gameplay. And
Hmm.
that's just fucking false, man. I'm sorry, like the gunplay in Uncharted is so much better than the gunplay in a lot of games that, I mean, not to, to start with games like Red Dead Redemption or Grand Theft Auto or The Witcher, who have like F tier combat, like the gameplay just sucks. Like
Hmm.
Uncharted is actually quite fun if you play it as a kind of free-for-all highlight generator where you're like doing, rope swings over people and then jumping down and
I think I may have seen some of your clips.
yeah, yeah. You have to play it in a free-form way. The game
Yeah.
gives you the ingredients to play it as a traditional cover shooter, and it's not very fun that way. But if you're scrapping and mixing it up and going out there and stealing people's weapons and,
Hmm.
using a combination of melee platforming traversal abilities, kind of almost playing it like Doom Eternal. It's
Hmm.
actually really fun and really beautifully animated and feels super snappy in the hands. Last of Us is a whole other league. Actually, I think the Last of Us games have some of the best third-person combat anywhere, third-person shooting combat. Um, so this is one of those truisms, that you hear. I wanted to just be on record saying I vehemently disagree, and I'll say more about that maybe if we ever talk about these games in detail. Um, but I'm just like thinking through games that I've played recently. Um, well, now I'm blanking, but yeah, I guess I'll just, the
Yeah.
Rockstar games aren't hailed for their shooting gameplay, but nobody gives them nearly as much, like flack for being bad shooters, and they're abysmal shooters. I mean, it's
Yeah.
hard to imagine anything worse.
I mean, I think it's worth, and we've said this before, but I do think, you're bringing up a good point, which is that even if this isn't the point, I guess the part of the point I would make is that, especially when we're looking back on a game in memory, I think even more so, it's the plot that kind of falls to the wayside, right? Or the lore or the narrative or whatever it is. I mean, when I look back on Castlevania, I mean, there's kind of not there's not really a plot, right? I mean, you're just kind of it's the traversal, it's the backtracking. I mean, this is the reason that it's it spawned the genre of Metroidvanias, right? You have to kind of, and I think this is maybe what I didn't quite grasp when I originally played it, is that you have to just keep kind of returning to the same places once you've done certain triggering events to open up new areas of the map, which, maybe. I'm kind of thinking too about the places where I would tap out of games, at least back in the day, as a younger person. And I do think I had more of a resistance to looking up guides online, because maybe unspoiled by having all of the information at my fingertips, I do think I was able to have a more, a little bit more of a accidental experience of some of these games where I was really, feeling like I was discovering things. And that's after all, I think a big part of what gaming is, right, is playing through and um but again, it's not the plot that you discover, it's the spaces that you discover or the new mechanics that you discover or those discrete moments that you discover that even if not everybody's going to have those same things they discover because they're not the baseline plot or whatever. I do think those are the things that have kind of stuck in my head across time.
For sure. Um, yeah, should we end there?
Yeah, we can end here. I think, yeah, this was a nice chat. As you can see, I have my magic lantern lit, so I'll
I
keep
guess
it
the
lit.
question, sorry to cut you off in the middle of the sign off, but I guess the one question would be, do you have any Christmas gaming plans this year?
Good question. Well, oddly, I mean, I am playing Lies of P, which I think, as I've already said, it does feel kind of like a Christmas time Bloodborne. So I played Bloodborne around Halloween and we did our Halloween episode, and now I'm playing Lies of P. So I think maybe we should talk about it, sometime soon. Because I'm kind of mostly playing that right now. I think after that, perversely, it doesn't feel like a good time to be playing it, but the new Silent Hill, Silent Hill F will be a nice, I think, terrifying Christmas surprise for me.
Silent
Um,
Hill Festivus.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, I think those will be the main ones. I do think, we can discuss it more, but I may try to pick up Final Fantasy VIII in case we may be discussing that sometime soon. But what about you? Any Christmas gaming?
So I'm actually trying to brute force relive my Uncharted Christmas experiences by playing the new, or I guess new-ish, Indiana Jones game,
Hmm.
which I just started. It's called Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, and it actually has that perfect like holiday vibe. It just goes down. It looks amazing. It's snappy. The story is brisk, but really well. Just like the cutscenes are good. The sort of like holograph Tupac version of young Harrison Ford looks amazing, and I think it's Troy Baker, the voice actor, does an incredible impression of him. It's like it's actually almost sounds like AI generated Harrison Ford or something.
Hmm.
And I guess I weirdly mean that as a compliment, even though I hate everything in relating to AI.
Yeah.
Um, but that's been really fun. I've only played about an hour of it, but it seems really good. And I did just finish Silent Hill F, and I'll probably keep playing for the alternate endings. I will say. A tree factors prominently in that game. So does a toy, even more prominently, a little doll, and candy. Candy's a big part of that game. You are popping candy. In fact, at one point, huge spoilers. I'll try to be vague, but like your character undergoes a crazy transformation. Um, and it's God, I don't want to say any more, but your character transforms in a certain way. I won't say whether it's mental or physical or, or spiritual or whatever, but it seems patently absurd that after this transformation that they would continue to pop little bits of candy in their mouth and chug sodas in the middle of combat, but indeed she does. So you have that to look forward to when you
Good.
get there for your Christmas, for a little Christmas spirit.
That's great. And I will say just to call back because I just thought of this, if you are indeed trying to brute force an old memory, then I think we may have to return to Huysman's classic Against Nature and retitle it Against Nathan. Because I think that seems like something our protagonist would do. So beware, just be careful about that.
Sounds good, Brian. And I see you have that magic lantern lit in the background, so no need for the reminder, I suppose. But I need to get my candles going in here and get nice and cozy for the rest of the holiday.
Sounds good. All
All
right,
right.
see you next time.
Take care and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.